When LEGO started back in 1932, they were making wooden toys. So obviously, to get to where they are today, they've had to change their design style a million different times. There are some pretty big turning points in their career, which I'll definitely go over, but it's the changes in between these turning points that nobody talks about, and they're actually really important. So today, I'll be going over what I think are the most important design changes LEGO's made since 1932. And just to speed things up a bit, I'll give a very fast-paced story of how LEGO went from making wooden toys to plastic ones. Basically, the founder of LEGO, old Kurt Christiansen, predicted the future and took a chance on plastic bricks, even though everyone thought he was crazy. After a visit to Copenhagen, where he saw the first ever plastic injecting molding machine and a few patents, LEGO was officially making toys out of plastic. But obviously, these aren't the same bricks we have today. They're all hollowed out on the inside, so there's no actual way to build with them. But don't worry, this is where the patents come in. After a trip to Copenhagen, Godfred Christiansen had the idea to add studs on top of every 2x4 brick and 3 tubes inside to create friction. This happened in 1958, and at this point, Godfred had taken over for his dad, which meant his idea didn't have to get approved by some higher up. He could just do it. So after talking to his lawyer, the idea officially got patented on January 28th, 1958. A lot of people call this the real birthday of LEGO, since they've been using this exact design ever since. And now that you're here, congratulations, you're officially caught up to when LEGO started using plastic. So now let's talk about what we're all here for. LEGO's design evolution is kind of like a tape measure. The big numbers that stand out are all pillars that needed to happen. But to get to those big numbers, you had to go through all of the little ones in between. And for LEGO, these little numbers are a lot bigger and more important than people think they are. So on top of talking about the most important changes LEGO's made, I'm also going to cover all the little ones in between. And a great place to start are the first sets that use those birthday bricks. They were in a theme called System Ileg, which translates from Danish to System in Play. The most memorable sets from this time period were in the town plan sub-theme, with ones like the fire station, the Volkswagen garage, and the church. These sets have a very distinct, simple design style, since the brick had basically just been invented, and they were still trying to figure out what they could actually do with it. They kept this style for pretty much the entirety of the 1960s, so a lot of the sets from this decade don't look very different. But by the 1970s, LEGO took things up a notch. If we look at our tape measure, one of the most important years for LEGO is 1978, but the years leading up to it are what make that year so important. In 1969, LEGO started the Legoland theme, and over the years, it basically became the LEGO city of its time period. As the years went on, you could clearly see LEGO upgrading their design style. They were adding more pieces to builds, and different ones too, which made every set get better year after year. Now, you might have noticed that something's missing from these sets. Minifigures. There isn't a single one to be found in any of them, but this, my friends, is why I used the tape measure analogy. The first official minifigure came out in 1978, which is mostly why it's such an important year. But 3 years before that, LEGO was testing this minifigure idea, and what we got in 1978 was just a product of the tests. In 1975, LEGO released the Wild West set, and with it came the first ever prototype for minifigures. They didn't have arms or legs, and they didn't even have a face, but they laid the foundation for the minifigures that were soon to come. The prototype was a success, so as time went on, they started adding things to them to see what they could get away with, like a red cross sticker on this one from the Rescue set, and makeshift bandanas on these ones from the Cowboys set. They kept doing different stuff like this, along with experimenting with colors, but eventually 1978 rolled around, and we all know what that means. This is the year LEGO officially released the first real minifigure, and it was just a simple police officer, but it was enough to make everyone lose their minds. The figures went from being whatever you want to call them, to actual people with arms, legs, hands, and a face. A real face. The first set that included this minifigure was the police car, which now is valued at almost $1,000. 1978 is one of the big numbers on LEGO's tape measure though, which means minifigures weren't the only brand new toy in their arsenal. The rest of 1978 brought us Castle in space, and the design style looked way different than anything they'd made in the last 5 years. These weren't just buildings anymore, they were entire worlds with their own identities. They only released one castle set that year, but it had a drawbridge, towers, and enough minifigures to satisfy anyone, while space had rockets, moon bases, and vehicles that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. But what really made these themes stand out were the minifigures. They weren't just generic yellow people anymore. They had different torso designs, unique head coverings, and accessories that actually matched their jobs. A castle knight looked like a castle knight, and an astronaut looked like an astronaut. This might seem obvious now, but back in 1978, this was groundbreaking. But fast forward to 1989, and LEGO did something that changed minifigures forever. The Pirates theme introduced the first major change to minifigure faceplates beyond the simple smiley face. Designer Jens Nygaard Knudsen explained it perfectly. It was necessary to alter the minifigure's expression to develop credible pirates, and a real pirate captain must have a patch on his eye, a peg leg, and a hook. So that's exactly what they did. I mean, this is coming from the guy who literally made minifigures, so how could you not listen? Pirates got eye patches, beards, mustaches, and even lipstick. This was the first time LEGO made a minifigure with a different faceplate, and it opened the floodgates for what was possible with character design. In 1992, the castle theme followed suit. They also started getting minifigs with actual faces, even though most of them still used the smiley face as a base. The biggest differences that year were in facial hair, but as the years went on, they kept expanding until they showed actual emotions. But we'd be nowhere if LEGO only changed the faces. 2 years later, in 1994, LEGO finally decided that legs deserved some attention too. The first minifigure with printed legs was the spurious droid from the Monorail Transport base set. Up until this point, legs were just solid colors, which meant that astronauts, pirates, and police officers all had the same boring legs. But once they started printing on them, every character could be way more detailed and way more unique. Speaking of unique minifigures, in 1995, skeleton minifigures finally appeared. Sounds normal, right? Well, here's the thing. Designer Niels Milan Petersen revealed that the skeleton was actually designed a decade before it showed up in stores. LEGO spent 10 years debating whether or not they should make a dead minifigure, because they didn't know how parents would react. Petersen said, "We were told off at the time for creating a dead minifigure, so they shelved it. But eventually, they said screw it. Kids love skeletons, and they've been in sets ever since." 2 years later, in 1997, marked the end of the LEGO color explosion, which started back in 1978 when they made Castle in Space. In these years, LEGO's color palette went from a handful of basic ones to almost 100 different ones. This explosion of colors meant that sets could be way more vibrant and detailed than anything that came before them. It also meant that MOC builders had way more options to work with, which is probably why the AFOL community started growing so much during this time period. Clearly, LEGO had been on a roll for a pretty long time, but they had no intention of stopping, because 1999 was another pillar year for LEGO, and it's all thanks to one thing: Star Wars. This was LEGO's first licensed theme, and it proved that they could take someone else's IP and successfully turn it into LEGO. The first wave of Star Wars sets had yellow-faced characters, which made sense since every other minifigure also had a yellow face. But this was just the beginning of something way bigger. In 2004, LEGO made a decision that redefined minifigures again, just like they did in 1989. This was when they finally gave minifigures flesh skin tones instead of the yellow color they'd been using the entire time. It gave minifigures a much more human look, and LEGO Star Wars and Harry Potter were the first themes to get it. LEGO kept the ball rolling in 2005 and released one of the most influential themes that's ever existed, LEGO City. Its prime in the late 2000s and early 2010s is unlike pretty much any other theme during this time period. Everyone knows the commercials, and everyone knows a LEGO City set when they see one. The design style was clean, the builds were intuitive, and the play features were endless. LEGO City basically became the default theme that every kid grew up with, and it's still going strong today. But in 2006, something really interesting happened. LEGO designer Jamie Berard released a book about illegal building techniques, which officially acknowledged that people were building in ways that LEGO never intended. These techniques involve stressing bricks, connecting pieces at weird angles, or using parts in ways they weren't designed for. By publishing this book, LEGO basically said, yeah, we know you're doing this, and it's actually not cool. This gave MOC builders the green light to experiment even more, and it influenced how LEGO themselves started designing sets. The next year, 2007, brought us the modular buildings theme, which was one of the first themes specifically aimed at adults. The first set, the Cafe Corner, was massive, detailed, and expensive. Everything that a set for kids wasn't supposed to be, but it worked. Modular buildings proved that there was a huge market for complex, display-worthy sets, and it set the stage for a lot of what LEGO makes today. The Ultimate Collector series in LEGO Star Wars, that's a direct result of modular buildings showing that adults will pay big money for high-quality builds. The theme technically ended in 2012, but it continued as a sub-theme in the Icons theme in 2013, and it's still going strong today. Let's get back to minifigures though, because 3 years later in 2010, LEGO launched the blind bag collectible minifigure packs, and each one had 16 different characters per series. This was a genius move because it turned minifigures into standalone products instead of just set accessories. Each figure came with unique designs, rare accessories, and limited availability, which made them incredibly collectible. The best part about them though is that they really show how much LEGO's improved in the last 15 years. Look at the minifigures in the first series compared to series 26 from 2021. 1974. This one was based solely on outer space, and they even made a minifigure that embodies deep space. Isn't that crazy? As cool as they are, they got nothing on 2014, because that year brought us the Lego Movie, and it was a success that nobody saw coming. This wasn't just a toy commercial disguised as a movie. It was an actual good film that both kids and adults loved. It led to multiple sequels and spin-offs, and proved that Lego could expand into entertainment media, even after so many different TV shows failed in prior years. The movie also introduced a ton of new fans to the brand, which is probably why sales skyrocketed in the years after it came out. By 2018, on the 40th anniversary of minifigures, Lego had made more than 650 unique face designs. That's insane when you think about it. We went from one simple smiley face in 1978 to hundreds of different expressions, emotions, and personalities by 2018. This massive library of faces meant that pretty much any character you can think of could be accurately represented in Lego form, which is a huge reason why licensed themes work so well now. But in 2019, Lego did something people had been thinking about for a while, but never actually thought would happen. They made their first 3D printed element, part 6627, in that year's Inside Tour set. This was a huge deal because it showed that Lego was willing to experiment with new manufacturing techniques. But this was only the beginning. 3 years later, in 2022, they made a 3D printed duck as a reference to the wooden duck they used to make back in the day, and they gave it out to Lego House AFOL attendees. That same year, they also made pogo sticks and handed them out as awards for crowdfunding The Secret Life of Lego Bricks book. Then in 2024, a green version of the duck showed up in the Inside Tour set for that year. But the real breakthrough came in the Holiday Express train set. This set featured a train piece, and it was the first time Lego mass-produced a 3D printed element. All of the other ones were super exclusive, but this one being available to everybody probably means we'll be seeing a lot more mass-produced 3D printed pieces as time goes on. But the last major change I want to talk about happened a few years before this train piece, back in 2021. That year, Lego released the Spider-Man at the Sanctum Workshop set, and it came with a Doctor Strange minifigure that had a rubber cape instead of the usual fabric ones. This might not seem like a big deal, but Lego's been using fabric capes since 1993, and after 30 years, Doctor Strange was the first one to get something different. Lego's still slowly rolling them out, but they've made enough of them that people have started to notice. It's one of those changes that makes you wonder why it took so long, but now that it's here, it's hard to imagine going back. Now, obviously, there are a million more things I could talk about that have added to Lego's design evolution, and I have talked about some of them in different videos on my channel, but this video just covered some of the most important ones. So if you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe and comment what your favorite design change has been over the years. Peace.